So without any further delay, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator and this meeting's instigator, Bruce Milton. Bruce currently works as an audio-visual production specialist with the TSA-TV studio team at the Transportation Security Administration within the Department of Homeland Security. In the past, he worked for Congressman Jim Moran as a trainee in the Directors Guild of America trainee program in New York City, working on projects that include Big Daddy, the Christopher Reeve directed The Rare Window remake, the Robert De Niro thriller 15 Minutes, and the second season of HBO's Sex and the City. After that, he worked locally for Henniger Media Services and continued as an independent producer with 3 short films and a feature released on Amazon Prime in his name. Bruce, please take it away.
Thanks, Mache, very much. And welcome, everybody. So a bit of housekeeping in the beginning. Please, again, mute yourselves so that we can enjoy the presentation and there's no interruption. And there will be a Q&A portion at the end. And so if you have a question that you'd like to pose to the panel, please put it in the chat. And my job will be to go through the chat and ask your questions. And so please put any questions you have in there. And we'll get started. And I'll start by introducing our panelists for tonight, who, again, thank you very much for coming out and doing this for us tonight. We know it's been busy, a busy news cycle. So first we have Stacey Brady. She's an award-winning person, and she is currently the Executive Vice President and General Manager of Field and Production Operations. Stacey oversees the NBC Universal News Group's production, bureau, field, and satellite technical operations, and that's pretty expansive. It even covers the international teams that provide day-to-day technical support for NBCU News worldwide. Thank you, Stacey. Jay Hurt is the Vice President of Operations and Engineering for NBC News. In Washington specifically, he oversees facility support and maintenance for news channel operations in the new combined Washington Bureau. Mark Greenstein is Senior Vice President of Design and Production for NBC News and MSNBC and is responsible for leading and creating the impressive physical and digital visuals that you see on air. And last but not least, Wesley Scruggs is the Principal Engineer for NBC News Washington Bureau, responsible for the technical aspects of the Bureau with over 40 years of experience. So panelists, thank you very much. And so now I will turn it over to Jay, who has a video portion to share with us. Go for it, Jay.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you, members of SMT, for allowing us to come and present this. Show off our new bureau is the best way to say this. This is a real treat for us. We spent a lot of time working on it, and we think it came out pretty well. So I'm going to share my screen now and jump right on into the video presentation to show off our bureau.
Hey everybody, I'm Peter Alexander. What do they say? Location, location, location. And if you're going to cover American politics, there is no better location than right here in the shadow of the nation's capital. This is North Cap, just steps away from where bills become law. And just think of all the news that's happened here in our backyard in the last month. An insurrection, an inauguration, and an impeachment. And that's in a month. This is the NBC News Group's newest crown jewel, our Washington Bureau, a new downtown location right in the heart of the district. Welcome inside. We're pretty proud of this place. Let me give you a tour. North Cap spans 6 floors here in the historic Hall of States building, home to more than 400 employees. Joining 30 Rock, the Brokaw Center in Los Angeles, Telemundo in Hialeah, CNBC's world headquarters in Fort Lee, and Sky in London. Our new home joins a long line of state-of-the-art broadcast facilities that keep NBC News and our partners at the center of government, right here in D.C. 9 NBC News programs will be anchored from here, including one that you might have heard of on Saturday mornings.
This is Today with Peter Alexander.
Sorry, had to get a little plug in there. Let me tell you where we are right now.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest running show in television history. This is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Our first floor newsroom is gleaming. If it's Sunday, it's right here where they'll shoot NBC's #1 Sunday show, Meet the Press, and Meet the Press daily weekdays on MSNBC. As you can see, the newsroom here gives a nod to the architecture found throughout this city, the 14-foot-high ceiling, a tribute to our neighbor, the exact design you'll find inside the main hall at Washington's Union Station. And etched into these columns, the words accuracy, courage, freedom, and truth, the tenets of journalism. Now more than ever, powerful reminders of the importance of a free press. To create this ground floor studio, construction teams had to remove 2 giant columns and add beams to hold up the rest of the building above us. All right, now follow me. I have to show you this. This is Studio N1. The windows right here, they probably look a little bit familiar, right? They were modeled after Studio 1A in New York, but these are our windows on Washington. And let me show you a great view. This way. There it is, the Capitol right behind us. And there's another trick you'll probably like. We can also roll in these massive LED screens, 650 square feet that give anybody passing by the latest news and showcase our NBC programming. Chuck, Andrea, Hallie, and Casey will call this studio home. It's where post-pandemic newsmakers will come to make news. And look over here, this is a PCR, and by that I don't mean a swab in your nose. It's the producer control room, where the editorial staff can work right alongside our camera and lighting engineers.
La van a presentar el jueves.
Working together to cover Washington for our Spanish-speaking audience, Telemundo's team produces stories for Hoy Dia and Mediodía, as well as their 6:30 and 11 p.m. national newscasts, featuring stories of interest to the Latino community.
Dallas Barr joining us now from Washington.
Adam, the White House today stressing that
Our DC News channel provides stories and content from Washington to our more than 200 affiliates and stations and 20 partners.
What they know about all this. Now,
CNBC's reporters here help make sense of the intersection of business and politics.
NBC Washington.
The news desk is where assignment editors and managers position our crews, producers, and correspondents to cover the relentless stream of events and stories right here in our region. Here in our newsroom, Nightly, Today, MSNBC, and NBC News Digital will all share space, coordinating and collaborating as news breaks.
He then asked the Supreme Court for an emergency order.
We also have 2 camera positions for our correspondents to do live hits for our network shows, MSNBC and News Now. 12 Avid edit suites to produce content all across our platforms.
3, 2, push 1, fade up, cue, ready, 6.
Here on the 8th floor is Washington Control, our brand new control room designed with the latest technology that allows us to be seamlessly linked to 30 Rock. The DC Bureau will also be home away from home for the Today Show, Nightly, and other special network programming. And of course, it's my weekend workplace. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday morning. I'm Peter Alexander.
And I'm Kristen Welker. It is good to be with you on this.
Studio N5 will also host the daily editions of The Readout, The Cross Connection, and The Sunday Show with Jonathan Capehart. This studio is unique. It allows production teams here flexibility to have a view of the Capitol Dome, if they like, or these gigantic monitor walls that help tell some of the other day's top stories for today or for MSNBC. So that's our tour. We hope you like the place as much as we do. One final stop if you're ever here and need a break. This is our in-house cantina, perfect for a snack or a toast to the new Washington Bureau here at North Cap.
Cut it? All right, thank you. Yeah. 8, please don't. 7, 6, and 5 to your music. 4, 3, 2, 1, music. 31
This
down
Sunday,
to
the
1 with a
threat to
push.
democracy.
7 is on the wall with Viz A.
Almost
Have a good show, Brett.
votes. President Trump and his allies.
Well, there is the overview as hosted by Peter Alexander. And from here, we can talk about the process of building this Washington bureau. We have several studios that when we started this, we wanted to incorporate the street view and try to take over what was the old La Colleen restaurant and Johnny's Half Shell and convert that into a studio. And we put one rather large multi-camera studio on the lobby level. And I think the whole newsroom acts as a set, and the whole floor becomes a studio in its own right. Then we added several Flashcam studios on the upper floors and two other large multi-camera studios on the 8th floor. N5 and N6 are the two on the 8th floor, and then we have a much larger studio on the 7th floor that we have not outfitted yet at this point. But this is Studio N1, and at this point, I'm going to ask for a little assistance from Mr. Greenstein, who his team did the initial design of this particular space. And I'll ask Mark to weigh in and kind of give us a little overview of some of the decision making that went into the process of creating this particular space and studio for Meet the Press and some of our other MS programming that will originate in this location.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. The design for N1 really started around the idea of seeing the Capitol, and as you saw in Peter's video, just how close we are in the view we have of the Capitol Dome. And the other piece of it was to make it accessible, to have these windows into the studio in the same way we do on today's show, so that people can come up and watch what we're doing. And it's the translation of just transparency in journalism. We want people to see what we're doing. And if you were to look, through that window, you actually see into the newsroom. So it was important for us to see how the news is made, and especially in the last couple of years of the news cycle, the importance of it and all the hardworking people each day. Obviously with COVID, that changed a little bit of who's in the office, but who every day is involved in the process. From a design side, what did we want it to look like? Well, we wanted it to feel unique to DC. We have studios throughout the world. And so at first glance, whether you were working in it or you were viewing it on television, it was really important to us to speak to the place that we are. So you notice all the neoclassical architecture in there. You saw in the video, which Peter did, the barreled ceiling, which is, inspired by Union Station. Here are all the wainscoting and the retro colonial blue color that's on the wall. And then obviously the floor design using, the marble look with those wood inlays, which is all very period. But we did also want a modern space. We didn't want to look back as a news operation, especially in today's day and age. We're always looking forward, and technology is a huge piece of that. We brought in a lot of these modern technology elements. So the frames on the wall are actually LCD monitors, so that we could change content and change branding for each different show. As you saw, the LED screens, every single one of them is movable. So we could make them all visually disappear if we wanted to and hide them in our scene dock, or they cover up the windows, and we do that for different reasons. Sometimes we don't want to see the Capitol. We want our editorial to be focused on something else. Or sometimes we want to enhance the Capitol, quite frankly, because we happen to have a view or something that is a little more specific. And we also knew that there would be guests in this set sometimes where, we do want privacy, or we do want to pre-tape something that isn't for air. So the enormous amount of flexibility we got from these giant LED screens. And then, like others, and you see this across the industry now, just in the way people are using LED technology, you just can't beat it for storytelling. The instantaneous way that you could add and layer onto a story through graphics or live shots, has just paid dividends, across all of our studios. And here it's multiplied by the fact that we could have that, or we could have the live outside view. The other interesting thing we did with technology was we used what's called Roscoe View on top of all of our windows and put Roscoe filters on the cameras. Obviously, for anyone who shot outside, or more importantly, has been inside with a window shooting out, mitigating sunlight is one of the biggest challenges you have. And especially when you look at some of our morning programming, be it Today Show, Meet the Press, or Morning Joe, where they start in full dark, depending on the time of year, and they end up in full light. Being able to dynamically can change the amount of light that comes through the window is critical without having to move in these giant filters or ND panels or roller shades, which generally don't look great. So we ended up putting Rosco filters on all the cameras, and we embedded the Rosco film inside the glass that you see there. And it makes for a pretty seamless operation when sunlight is something we have to mitigate. And again, you add that to the fact we can move walls in and out if there's something we don't want to see. It really has created just an incredibly unique space. And the last thing from a technology point specific to the studio that was really important to us from the creative direction was the ability that we could control and feed the content. So all of this is interconnected between the control room in DC that you saw and also all of our control rooms in 30 Rock. So what you don't see in this picture, there's a bunch of LED screens facing the outdoors that are what we would call consumer facing. And then obviously we have LEDs in our other studios and N5, what you saw Peter walk through where Saturday Today is. But we're able to control the content from DC. And also, since we've been working from home, we actually have the operators for all of our shows literally in their living rooms or basements or wherever the heck they are, controlling all of those walls during the live broadcast, and graphic artists who are also spread out throughout the country, directly feeding them from wherever they are. And that was a huge, huge change in the way we used to work, where a graphic may have been produced in New York, then had to be sent down to the graphics team in DC, then had to be translated into whatever the playback system was for that particular studio. We've now made it so that any graphic, once inside the environment, could literally play to any single destination we have across multiple campuses. So we're able to manipulate this content in just such a smarter way. And the other piece of that is the playback piece. Again, you could have an operator sitting anywhere, control the same exact configuration for this studio compared to a New York studio. And that one of the positives of COVID is we were forced into a situation to create that, but certainly the flexibility that we've taken away from it will be something that we hold on to. I also want to say that Jay and team, sorry, and I know you're going to share this, Jay gets extra credit because I think Peter flew by it. The way that he was able to manage the team that removed those beams that literally hold up the entire building was pretty amazing. And to me, that is probably the largest accomplishment of when we walked into this space, and I was like, it'd be a great space if we could take these two things down. And fast forward 2 years later, they're gone, and yet the building is still standing. So that team gets a huge amount of credit.
And I'll take that and go right to the next section here of one of our biggest challenges for this build was removing the columns that were holding up a section of this building. We brought in an engineering team. These are massive steel beams that span the length of the multiple columns so that we could actually cut out these columns. It was a pretty interesting process from start to finish. They did one 1/8-inch cut all the way through those beams, the columns themselves, and let it settle before they came back and jackhammered them out, as you see here in this video. But it was a pretty impressive scene to see how those big beams got brought in. They closed the road, brought them in, and it took about 3 days for that to happen. But as you see there, this is a time lapse of what the newsroom looks like now versus what it looked like when we were starting the construction process. As I said, we have 7 studios. This is an example of a Flashcam studio up on our 8th floor. Very simple, single camera guest or anchor or host with a live view of the Capitol. We didn't embed Rosco here on the 8th floor, but we have rolling shades to cover the different NDs and shoot out of the windows. Our an example of another Flashcam Studio. This one is multi-purpose. It has a monitor wall in the background, but it can also, that monitor wall can shift and we can shoot directly out to the Capitol view. Our N5 studio, which was what we originally started our 400 North Capitol experience with years ago, was the corner studio overlooking the Capitol. And we redid this studio during this process. One of the reasons that we had to redo N5 and make it all nice and new was during our construction process, we had a full-on fire, and it gutted that corner of our operation, and it took us off the air here at 400 North Capitol for some time. We had to relocate everyone to Nebraska Avenue. All of our operations that were working on the 8th floor while we were doing the lobby construction had to relocate in a day. And we moved all our shows and all the production that was originating on the 8th floor to Nebraska Avenue. We were very fortunate to have that as a fallback location to go to as quickly as we did, but it definitely complicated our build to have to go through that process. We also have another multi-camera studio on the 8th floor. This is more of a anchor, single anchor with maybe one guest. It has monitor walls, it has side monitors, and it also has the Capitol view. Gets a lot of use for a single anchor. On the 7th floor, this will be a future studio. It's full of junk right now as we can complete our build, but this will be another large multi-purpose, multi-camera studio that shoots back toward the Capitol or into the newsroom. What's in the studios from our standpoint, down in the lobby, we have 8 cameras, 6 full robotics with a prompter and tally, a jib and a steady cam. We have the 4 large LED video walls, 2 LCD video walls, 5 LCD portrait monitors, as Mark alluded to, and all of it lit with LED lighting for 3 different set locations inside the space. We went with Sony 3100 cameras, and we started purchasing our equipment about 4 years ago for this, and that's where we were at the time. And we've got Ross 700 series PEDs, Q-Script prompters, Laird and Naoti both make up our complement of LED walls. And then we used NEC for the LCDs in and around the studio. On the 8th floor, the N5 studio, similar complement, 5 cameras, 4 robotics with prompter and tally, steady, 3 LCD video walls, 3 LCD LED, and 3 LCD video walls, 2 LCD touchscreens. On weekend today, right now, we're doing weather segments there with the touchscreens. And then 3 different set locations in this studio as well. Panasonic UB300 cameras and Ross 600 series PEDs. Laird makes up the LED complement, and Planar did the LCD. Our control rooms, we have one master control room called Wash Control. It's a full control room. It's where we actually mix and integrate Meet the Press right now. It has a floor-to-ceiling LCD main monitor wall, LCD producer monitor wall for back deck. We're utilizing Dreamcatcher for playback, which is DNF controlled out of the switcher, VizRT for our graphics, and we have a Sony switcher right now with 40 frame sync proc amps wrapping around the switcher, and tectronic scopes, roller audio monitoring, RTS panels, the usual complement for inside the control room. As you see in this particular picture, we installed plexiglass for some COVID separation, and it's been an interesting year for all of us. And I think our production, as Mark alluded to earlier, we've done a lot of this from home. We have a very small crew actually in the control room right now. And as Mark said, graphics are being fed in from New York operators sitting at home. And our back deck really only has one person. The show EP is not sitting in the control room. He's sitting in another producer control room on another floor. We've separated most folks out. So it's an interesting mix of how we've managed to continue to do full-scale productions with limited staff on premise. Our producer control room or production control room, we call them a little bit of both. PCRs, the majority of our shows here in Washington are home run back to New York and integrated. All of our MSNBC programming, all of our CNBC programming, they all get home run and either switched to Inglewood Cliffs or switched to 30 Rock, depending on where they're going to go. So we ended up with a lot of these PCR control rooms that allow the editorial staff and limited tech staff to see everything that's happening and work in a control room environment, but actually it's not a full control room. It's a production control room or producer control room, allowing folks to work remotely and still feel attached to the show. And we have several of those here in Washington. On the lower level, we put a PCR for our lobby studio, and then our full control room is up on the 8th floor. And this is just an example of what our PCR looks like on the lobby. It's a basic computer interface, comms, RTS, phones, and workstations for our folks. Inside there, we have lighting and robotic control, audio. Audio is a big, interesting component of the build here. Our wash audio control room is a full 5.1 surround mixed room. We've got power JBL speakers, 64 fader Artemis control console, the DAD playback system for music and Pro Tools for editing, 64 channels of VoIP, 24 analog phone interfaces, 24 noise reduction, cedar noise reduction, and 2 linear acoustic upmix for our system. And here's a nice photo of our wash audio control room. We have 4 of these audio control rooms throughout the plant. A couple of them, 2 of the full Artemis control consoles, and then we have some Brios scattered around. And this just gives you an idea of the complexity of our Washington build when it comes to the audio side. 2110 Hydra interface, 512 by 512, 2110 Dante interface, Hydra to Dante, AES to Hydra, analog to Hydra, RTS to Hydra, rather large RTS interface that we tie trunk to all of our locations around the world with NBC and CNBC and MSNBC. And it gives you just an overview of what we put in and installed here in Washington for that purpose. We have Wizicom for RF mics and comms. We have 36 wireless mics and 24 wireless IFBs. And one of the cool features we built into this plant was we put receive and transmit antennas throughout the facility You can put a wireless mic on the 8th floor, go all the way down to the lobby and still pick up and communicate to anything. So anchors can move freely around and still be connected and hear everything that's going on from our comm system. One of the goals I had when we started designing this was to create a little bit different workflow for our media traffic control and digital production area. We ended up dropping this right off our assignment desk, similar to what we've done at 30 Rock here in Washington, and combining the functionality of this area for several people. This just gives you an idea of the users who are connecting into our router right now. We have 275 user accounts set up on our Evertz Web VCP interface and 20 different customized control groups. We're supporting 14 locations worldwide that are switching in and out, content in and out of Washington. And I think, you know, from our standpoint, we have 7 operators who sit in the media traffic control area on most days. It's a pretty cool place to watch everything that's coming in. From a playback standpoint, we have 68 channels of Evertz Dreamcatcher that are being utilized for clip playback, video playback into shows, monitor wall feeding, several other things, all driven by the different departmental user groups here in Washington, our DC Media Traffic Control Group, our DC Playback Group, our technical directors, tech managers, engineering team, and our news channel operations all pull content from Evertz Dreamcatcher and use it throughout the day in different areas. We have 19 editors using our systems here for editing. We actually have 16 edit suites here in Washington, but right now we're virtual from almost all of that. And in a little bit, I'll let Stacy talk about the work from home side of our overall operation. But here in Washington, we have 453 Avid Media Central users logging in every day to our Avid stack. The acquisition area sits side by side with our media traffic control. This is where it's very active these days with Zoom and Teams calls and recording all these. We have several different ways in which we're pulling that content into the new bureau. Here's the row of edit suites. Right now, there are really no editors sitting in these suites on most days. We bring in 1 or 2 as crash editors in case we have failures with our remote editing systems, but it's been working pretty well for us for the past year. Just an example of an edit suite, all of the desks and consoles are forecast consoles. They're sit stand for both the producer and the editor. We tried to give them as much space and nice setup room for our group when they do return to work. Our router is a full-blown IP-based router from Evertz. We actually have 2 redundant EXE routers that are linked together to provide redundancy with 5,760 bidirectional HD signals throughout the plant. We built a new equipment center in the basement of the building. That was one of our first phases here. We have 75 racks in this location. They're the larger floor to ceiling, I think 58 RU racks full. And as most of you know, everything is moved to fiber these days. We have quite an extensive fiber array. We still threw in a few jack fields and patch panels just so we could quickly monitor and check things as we needed. But for the most part, everything is electrical to optical and vice versa. throughout the or operation. And this is just a couple of shots of the EXE twin chassis as they sit, and the optical interfaces. Here's an example of the back plane of the fiber as it comes in and out of the router, and then back to electrical as it goes on to devices. Extensive use of fiber, something like 7,000 strands of fiber between floors. Our full complement of encoders and decoders and satellite receiving area, and then our Avid virtual stack and Avid media composer and systems, and the air speeds for content recording, a full UPS system. We installed a full UPS system and backup generator that will power the plant in the event of a power outage here in the Capitol grid, which is something we've in my time here of 30 plus years have never had at 400 North Capitol. It'll probably go out tomorrow now, but from an infrastructure standpoint, this just gives you an idea of where we are with the amount of content moving in and out of the router and how many air speeds we have, frame syncs, proc amps, encoders, decoders, multi-viewers. I think that's some of the biggest improvements, is just the ability to have multi-viewers, as many options as we can. That's one of the really great advancements with the IP workflow is the ability to create monitor walls and put those VIPs anywhere you need them. Our overall operation, we have quite a lot of live views, as most folks do now. We have 28 ingest channels here for live view, 36 units in the field. We have 22 satellite downlinks, both here at 400 North Capitol and over at our Nebraska Avenue antenna farm. Our remote sites, we're in the process of federating our routers, so it'll be one router architecture with everts at all of these remote locations. They'll all show up on our master router through Magnum and be able to, the average user won't know he's sub-switching something from the Capitol or the White House or the State Department or Pentagon. It'll all just show up in our master router inventory. Our transport paths, this is where we made a lot of improvements with connectivity to New York. We put in 27 returns and 45 transmits for our Los Angeles Bureau 9x9, our Telemundo Miami operation 6x6, Inglewood Cliffs 4 returns, 36 transmits, Sky in London and our London Bureau both have a 5x9 stack. And then we left a lot of connectivity to our Washington local WRC station. We still have our satellite antenna farm there and other connectivity points. And then our news channel partner down in Charlotte, we have 32 receives and 14 transmits there. And this gives you an idea of how we're interconnecting our operations using big data links. We put in dual redundant 100 gig pipes to New York. We also have dual 10 gigs to our New Jersey Inglewood Cliffs location, dual 10 gigs to our LA Bureau, our Colorado Dry Creek antenna and NBC network main distribution point at Dry Creek, Colorado, and then our news channel headquarters in Charlotte, and then our London headquarters, our London Bureau for worldwide coverage. And that gives you an idea of how we created the DC hub, which is really what our design intent was to make Washington a place to bring in this content from Washington and around the world, and then turn around and get that content quickly back to all of our other bureaus and our mothership in 30 Rock. And I think that has been a pretty successful transition over the past year as we started to settle into our new bureau. This gives you an idea of some of the connectivity we have in and out of our location here. We have a lot of fiber in Washington that we can deploy CWDM frames that seamlessly integrate into the Evertz system, and we can create a lot of content. And last but not least, one of the hardest things to get accomplished in this project, surprisingly, it was easier to get approval to knock the columns out and put in support beams for a building that's 8 stories tall. It was harder to get these bollards, security bollards, approved by the architect of the Capitol, DDOT, and all the other 7 different agencies had to sign off on us putting these secure bollards around our perimeter. And I just thought that would be a fitting end to our presentation, just to give you an idea of the complexity. It took almost 4 years to get the approval for these little security barriers. And at that point, I will turn it back on to you guys for questions and comments.
No problem. Thank you, Jay. That was impressive. Like, and I meant to say at the top of this, my interest in this. So I'm a local kid, born in DC, raised in Alexandria, and you can't spend time in this area without being a little bit of a political junkie. And so I watched the Sunday news shows, and so I watched Chuck Todd Meet the Press, and in January, lo and behold, he unveils this new set. And I was like, what? They have a new set? This is crazy. So I was very impressed by it. And so I reached out, and this is why we have this presentation here today, which is great. And so, Stacy, I want to turn to you a little bit. Can you talk about, much like Jay said, can you talk about, and others, please feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat column, but I'll start this off. So, Stacy, can you talk about that connectivity that you wanted to have in this new building with the other entities of NBCU News, and also about the work from home stuff that Jay talked about? Like, I'm curious, as an editor, how you have everybody, did you give everybody laptops to work from home and edit with Avid? How is that working? So go ahead.
Well, first, as far as connectivity, it's a work in progress, because I didn't always have every bureau. So the bureaus would come in sort of one by one. So different bureaus had different ideas technically of how to set up their shops. And now we are like one unit, and it is very important to all of us, actually, that we standardize as much as possible. We operate in sort of the same mode, because we are NBC News together, not individually, you know. So so that's a process, but it's definitely getting there. When the pandemic hit, I think that there was a lot of confusion about disaster recovery, and there was a lot of talk about, well, in New York we could go to DC, or maybe we could go to Englewood Cliffs, or, you know. And it was sort of like, you'd sit there and you go, well, it's actually everywhere. So those aren't an option for us. So we immediately sent pretty much everybody home. There had to be some people in various bureaus, including especially 30 Rock, because we just didn't have the technology. But we were, from as far as editing, we just so happened to have been virtualizing all of our editing. And so we got quite lucky in that we were able to send everybody home. And I want to talk about editing a little bit for us, because I think that we have gotten to a point that we are so collaborative with our producers editing from home. And I know Brian Walmsley is here somewhere. It probably says Stacy Brady, but it's Brian Walmsley. but they developed a system called News Monitor System. And it's a homegrown system, but it's something, I think it's like 840 feeds right now that go into that you can watch from home, and you could connect to your editor. And the editors originally went home, there's an assortment of, laptops or desktops, depending on sort of, what we could do at the time. But I think, I want to say there's probably about 90 to maybe more, probably over 100 editors that are home, working from home. And the thought right now is they are never coming back. And I think for me and my group, sort of what we're thinking about is we have progressed so far. This pandemic allowed us to do things that we were never able to do before. We would have never been able to do. Everybody would have never let an editor work from home, or anybody in a control room work from home, or graphic artists work from home, or the talent in their summer homes, from their home studios. It wouldn't have happened. But the pandemic allowed for this, and we're looking at it, it's like we've gone so far and we've come and we're so progressive. Why would you ever go back? I look at that personally and professionally. I would hope we've all learned things that we should never go back. So that's part of it. I think we have we have different levels of home studios. We have the super deluxe model all the way down to, the 99 cents model. There's about 150 of them throughout the system. That's another question. Who's coming back? Who's not coming back? Are you going to bring guests back into the control rooms? Can the guests be on Zoom? Can we save some money here? Do we need all this real estate? So I think that it's been a great learning experience. I think from a technical perspective, I think it's been awesome to really kind of, really go far with this and experiment and take risks. So that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a very high level, but that's kind of where we are.
No, and that's great, and I think a lot of companies are realizing that. It's very true. This pandemic made us think about things a little differently and forced us into situations that probably never would have happened had it not happened, unfortunately. And so, and maybe Jay can answer this, but and first I'll go to one of the questions in here was, how are you handling all the remote interviews using Teams, Zoom? And how did you standardize the process of using Zoom? As we see, a lot of correspondents and a lot of reporters are using Zoom, to interact on shows. How did you guys formalize that process?
Stacy, I don't know if you want me to talk.
Sure, go ahead, Mark.
So, I mean, we're using a bunch of products and we at one point talked about standardizing, but I think what you find is some people feel, guests specifically, not so much our people, but guests specifically, some only use Teams or they only use Zoom. So what we've done on the 30 Rock side is, allow for those type of different connections. So, we have a handful of Macs and a bunch of PCs. Talk show is one of the big things we're using for Skype. And essentially we've centralized all that. So there's a group of people who essentially manage those type of remotes, what I'll call social remotes, that come in. But by the time it gets to the control room, it actually feels no different than any other type of source that comes in. And it took us a little while to get there. When we first started, it was all based upon the individual control room. So a booker would say, hey, I have this guest who's calling in via FaceTime. And, someone else would literally be in the control room on a Mac trying to get that FaceTime, scan, convert it, get into the switcher, set up audio. And over the course of the pandemic, we said, hey, it would make more sense if we handle this in a similar way that we handle, either a satellite or a fiber or a live view, which is more centralized and then can be passed between the different control rooms, especially in our case where we have so many. And that's been pretty effective. I mean, I would say talk show is the primary device we like to use. We like Quick Link as well. But again, there's some people who are just like, yeah, I got FaceTime. That's all you're getting if you want me on air. And I will say editorially, not so much visually, and obviously I'm responsible for what we look like, but editorially, I don't see how we will ever go back. Meaning the way we could book people now and the people who will agree to be on air, that never would have done that in the past because either they had an engagement or the studio was too far. I just don't see why we would ever not want to keep that capability alive. That said, I do think we should bring back as much talent as possible because I'm a little bored of the home studio. Honestly, I think what Stacy undersells, I think that her and her team did was just how quickly they deployed so many of these home studio setups. And what an impact that was, not just for the talent, but for the entire technical teams, the stagehands, the camera guys, the lighting guys, all these people who would have had to be in the building to support that, who were able to keep safe during this time. And we didn't miss a beat. I mean, not a beat on air, deploying those things. And her team just did such an amazing job with it. And then over the course of time, together, we decided, how can we up the game? So it's not just a person sitting in front of a monitor. So we actually started using virtual set technology in most of our home studios at this point. So most are still sitting in front of monitors that we're just feeding a green screen to. And then we're using VizRT to essentially make a virtual set. And so if you watch some of our talent, sometimes like Lester looks like he's actually in the studio. And we're actually feeding the monitors over his shoulder, even though he's sitting somewhere else. And I think that was a huge accomplishment to be able to pull off in the way we did it.
And that was one of the questions that was in the chat as well, is how are you guys utilizing AR and virtual sets as well? And it sounds like you're utilizing them more for the home setups rather than in the new studio as well. And you can talk about that, Mark.
Yeah, so right now that is because, again, the majority of our talent, I shouldn't say the majority, about half of our talent, especially on the cable side, are still at home. So that's where it makes sense for us to deploy this technology, as opposed to we're in any of our studios. We just have so many of these video walls. We have so many different ways to storytell. I think the learnings we got from deploying this at the scale we did at home, when people start returning in a larger fashion, I think you'll see a lot more of this type of stuff inside of our studios. And look, we've done that before, especially around big events. Democracy Plaza, obviously we went all in on augmented and virtual every election. But I think, you'll see it more part of our everyday life as we start bringing more people back in.
Right. And so I'll go way back. So what made North Cap the location that was chosen, by the way? So you guys spent years and years at Nebraska and elsewhere. And so what made that location specifically appealing to build this new set, a new studio?
Location.
Jay, can I tell the story, Jay?
You can tell the story.
So our news chairman at that time, Andy Lack, he wanted, it was all about guests to come to, on set. And we were all the way up at Nebraska Avenue, and it wasn't working as he would have liked. And so, and I'm not sure what the year, but I have to believe, what do we think? It was 6 years ago?
About 5 years ago.
Okay, 5 years ago. That we started the hunt for a building, and we went literally from building to building. And Jay kept saying, why not 400 North Cap? And everybody was like, yeah, sure, okay. And then we go look at another building. And then Jay would say, why not 400 North Cap? And then, I don't know. And then one day we walked in, and then Andy goes, why aren't we looking at 400 North Cap? And then, so here you go. And then we stopped looking at everything else. And, but the other part of 400 North Cap, and Jay happens to be, he's not the landlord, but he should be, because he knows every single, aspect of that building. We had to kind of move people around and hoping people would like end their leases so that we could grab another piece and it would be like contiguous space and all. But all in all, it was definitely a good idea, and it was Jay's.
Well, I made the pitch the first time about 14 years ago when La Colline closed. I presented it. We took it up the flagpole, and it didn't get greenlit that time. It just wasn't the right time. And then when Johnny's Half Shell closed, I took another stab at it, and that got Andy in the door. He walked in.
You stalked
and
them,
said,
Jay. That's what you did.
Place. This is where we're going to go. I want it here. And then Mark got involved, and he came up with a beautiful design, and his team, and that's how it happened. But yeah,
that's great, because I was interested in that, given what you said about the beams and that you had to gut the infrastructure just to make it. Mark said, I want no columns. So, to make that happen, I was like, what if you chose somewhere else? So that's interesting.
I was only joking. They actually did it.
And so what I also wanted to ask was, so, you guys, this is 4 years in the making. You're developing the things you want the new build out to be. How did the pandemic affect the things that you guys ended up choosing and going into this, or if at all? Did it change? I know it changed it during it, but did it change anything you asked for or built or did as this was going on?
I think it slowed down the process. We probably would have been completed obviously much earlier. But the truth is, by the time the pandemic hit, much of the groundwork was not only laid, but was physically built. So I think really where we saw a little bit of, I won't even call it a course correction, because the team did such a good job of laying out the infrastructure. When we had to start moving certain pieces of work home, be it edit or graphics or what have you, or producers, the infrastructure was there to be nimble and do it. And I think that's a credit to the thought that went into it. Obviously, we had no clue there was a pandemic going to happen 4 years ago, but we were able to be fairly nimble just in the way we work. I think from a design standpoint, we still stayed pretty true to design, because I think that in the end, we do hope there will be some return. There will be a return to work. Obviously, it'll be different. But space will matter, and collaboration and in person does matter. And if you're young in your career, having the opportunity to learn from others makes a difference. And so I think it still was important for us to still build out this space to accommodate for all of those things.
Yeah, and honestly, the first thing we built, the first phase, was the rack room and the guts. We dropped in the routers. They were purchased 3.5, 4 years ago, before COVID was even on anybody's radar, and all of that was already being installed and actually operational before the pandemic hit. It was the other space, the other floors. The fire put us back a year. I'll be honest. It knocked a year. It added a year of to this process for me.
Took a year off of life.
Yeah.
Hey Jay, this is Wesley. I'm here with you now. I'm having to drive off the base, so once I get off the base, I'll find a place to pull over and park if you need anything from me.
Thank you, Wes.
Thanks for joining, Wes. And so a lot of people in the chat during your presentation, Jay, were talking about security. Obviously, you talked about the ballasts, and you talked about being on the ground floor for aesthetic reasons and view reasons. But how did you take the security concerns into account, having looky-loos and the ability for people to look in and look out and that kind of thing? Can you talk a little bit about the security?
Well, it's bulletproof glass all the way around. The monitor walls are another big aspect of that. We can actually close off the corners, and you don't even know there's a show going on if we choose. And that's really kind of how we approached it. We also, during say Meet the Press, we'll have a police officer presence on the corner and moving around the exterior of the building, as well as a lot of internal security whenever we're in studio. And I think, it's obviously a concern, but it doesn't override everything that we're doing, and we're all conscious of today's environment. We've had to board up this space a couple of times for unrest. I think all of us in the Washington area have seen that, and we're aware of it, but it doesn't dominate how we treat the space or what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I'm in the federal government space, and some of the people you have on air will, Secret Service will appreciate some of that stuff. So definitely you had to take some of that stuff into account. And so a question in the chat that just prompted me something. So was there anything they're asking, was anything left at Nebraska Avenue other than WRC? But was there any technology that you had in Nebraska that you brought over to the new space that you just couldn't live without, or you loved, or, it just worked so well you had to bring it?
There's a lot of connectivity still through Nebraska Avenue. All of our, because we're partners, obviously, with Comcast Sportsnet, all of the connectivity for all of the stadiums, Verizon Center, FedEx Field, all that still goes through Nebraska Avenue currently, and then migrates down to us for sports coverage. There's still a fair amount there, and as I said earlier in the presentation, we still have a satellite antenna farm that's at Nebraska Avenue that we're utilizing. A lot of downlinks. We just physically don't have the real estate here to put additional dishes on the roof of the building, so we're utilizing the ground at Nebraska Avenue. From a technology standpoint, there's really not much that we moved. We left F control behind and started new here, and that's kind of where we are.
Great. And so someone also asked, because of the learning curve, and I saw that you had different camera systems in your studios as well and stuff. And so because you had to buy 4 years ago, is there any equipment you feel is behind the curve, or because you're broadcasting at 1080p, correct? You didn't jump to 2 or 4K, correct?
No, we did not. We did not go with an IP switcher because it wasn't ready for prime time when we started this project. Sony had not delivered at that point a fully workable IP switcher. They were still in development, and we held and did not go with a full IP switcher. And I think that's on our list to go forward with very soon. I think that's probably the one area that we'll upgrade. We waited a little bit on graphics and got VizRT and did get that native 2110 in, and that was good. But I think 4 years ago we weren't quite there with some of the major components.
I was gonna say, what's on your wish list now going forward?
Switcher is that we had a capital discussion today. That's on the list.
No wish list. We're done.
Cameras are developing too. I think when we started this, we didn't go with the IP-based CPUs at the start of this. It just wasn't quite ready, and we purchased the bulk of this equipment 4 years ago, so it took a long time to get here. And as we said, we delayed a year with the pandemic and the fire and a few things that pushed us back some. I think that would be it.
And you had some customization with the whole, being able to deal with the daylight and stuff like that. And so, Mark, I'll go to you again real quick. So what was when they told you get this new space, what was the idea behind you developing it to resemble DC and use some of the architecture and the things of that sort? What was your vision?
I mean, I think the primary vision was not only for the people who watch us, but for the people who work there, for this not to feel like a generic office space, not to feel like this could be in LA or New York or pick your city. You know, if you're reporting on a story, you should sort of live in that story. And that's what we wanted the space to feel like. And obviously that translates, we hope, to the viewer as well. I think that when you watch Meet the Press and you look at the way that, you know, we shoot it, and obviously in the future when we bring more guests on set, you'll see it even more. But I think it easily speaks to the content, to what we're producing. And I think that was important. And I think we did a really nice job of justifying that with making sure that the technology was modern. Again, we have so much flexibility in this space, whether it's through just analog moving of things or all of the different digital displays that we have. I think it'll be a long time before we're bored of the way this looks.
No, absolutely. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. And I will say that too. I don't know if people picked up on the presentation, but you're incorporating a lot of different programs. I mean, you got CNBC, MSNBC, NBC News. You got all the programming involved in all those going on. What were the discussions like about how to get something that pleased everybody, essentially?
Well, what's amazing, I mean, we knew we had a certain number of brands, but I think, Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong, or Jay, since we started to completion of project, we added 2 or 3 brands to our portfolio, specifically on the digital side with NBC News Now and The Choice. And I think it was around, you know, January 6th, around the insurrection coverage, that in the Meet the Press studio, I think we did 4 different programs for 4 different networks in one day. And because of the way we were able to, you know, change the resolution of the screens and the content in the screens, there was no fear that, oh my God, that looks like something we just did an hour ago on a completely different brand. And so I think, you know, the flexibility we built into the space, I don't think we knew we needed as much as we've been using it, but it certainly has paid off for all the different entities that Jay and team have to support every day.
Absolutely. And someone asks, and I did local news in Richmond, and so I had to operate the SAT truck. Someone asked, do you have any mobile studio units, and how did you put these together using what technologies?
Stacy, you want to take this one? Because that's your baby.
We have one, maybe another one on the way. Not sure. We're evaluating our satellite truck usage, as you know, many of us are, I think. But the studio, the mobile units that you go into the house, that one's used, you know, it's kind of like when we first built, it's a live view technology. It's live view on, you know, on a small truck. But when we first built it, nobody used it. And it did come before the pandemic, okay? So it was like, and I keep thinking, you know, if you built it, they will come, and you know, it's like there and it's there. And now it's out multiple times every day of the week. And now I feel like we probably need another one. And I think, again, because of pandemic, this will be, as opposed to maybe bringing people in or putting them on Zoom, it's just another option for guests, you know. So
yeah, Stacy's being modest. It's got a really nice background visual screen that can be fed via the live view receiver. It has prompter, has all the comforts of a home studio setup. Just can be pulled right to your front door, and it gets it's booked 2 to 3 times a day, every day.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I imagine the conversations you guys are having are much like everybody else, in that even live view itself, they have mobile units that, you know, make you a quote unquote backpack journalist, but they don't have a truck per se, but you have a unit that you can then send out an anchor and a cameraman and do that as well. And that gets into, do you now need the mobile newsroom as it traditionally was?
You mean the mobile, the one that we just built, the truck that you bring to somebody's house?
Right. And a lot of people now in the pandemic have been using more smaller footprint technologies to do
I
that.
think it's a comfort thing, what Jay is saying. We did build a monitor background that could be fed any, backgrounds. And we also have a prompter in there, and we have return. So especially if it's an important guest, somebody you want them to go in. We have even, dealt with like hair and makeup pre-pandemic for, those guests. So it just depends, it's the right tool for the job. Either if it's an important guest, I wouldn't send, necessarily just a crew with a live view. This works just as, as well, if not better, because of it's built in, so you don't have to set up and you don't have to do all the work.
And that's true too. You want to, if you're going to be on the news, you want the news, like, you want to be that.
Yeah.
And there's also people who don't want to have crews in their house, especially in times of COVID. And again, I think Stacey's being very modest about the success of this thing. There's people who just don't come in my home for whatever reason. And I think it's invaluable just for that, let alone all the other technologies that hang off it, for proper returns and also creatively. There are times we want things to look a certain way and don't necessarily want to look at someone's Zoom background, and this gives us that full control.
No, that's very true. And I was going to ask the age-old question. Well, and actually I asked this of Jay back when we were doing our practice and stuff. So we just got a new facility that was built. And of course, the pandemic makes not a lot of people come in. And so are you using this opportunity for not a lot of people in to like do some fine tuning with the building or doing anything to do some tune-ups or shakedown crews? Has that helped at all?
It was, as I said in one of our earlier sessions, I would call it a soft opening. Although programming moved and it came here in one day and we were on the air, people didn't come back, and we were able to take a little bit more time with workstations, some of the computers, phones, some of the normal office niceties that we still, we're ready now, but I think it would have been a really rough month or two if all 200 or 300 people that work at the NBC Bureau in Washington walked in the door in one weekend. That would have been a pretty rough road to go down.
I think Jay has forgotten how tough the first month was. Within the first month of viewers opening, we had an insurrection, an impeachment, and an inauguration, all within the first 30 days of opening the doors to that space. So I think it was a soft launch, I guess, for people coming in. But for Jay and Wes and that team to support all that production, which was focused around DC, that was anything but a soft launch.
And as we've said, news doesn't sleep. So, I mean, there's always something going on. There's always things to cover and handle. The age-old question is, if you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently? And I'll let each of you answer. So Jay, you can go first. Is there anything, so think about it a minute. Is there anything knowing now that you would have done differently back then, 4 years ago?
I wish we would not have had a fire, but I would have loved to have not experienced
things in your control, Jay. Things in your control.
This has been an incredible journey. I was blessed to have a wonderful team to work with, from an architectural standpoint to design engineers to systems integration group. It really was a very large collaborative process, and a lot of people work together really well in this. And I think overall, I couldn't say I would change a whole lot from the approach we took from day one to where we are today, to be honest.
That's impressive. Wow. Okay. Mark, anything you would knowing now, would you go back and change?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jay. We had, I mean, the team, both internally and externally, who came together on this. I mean, it took a village, as they say. You know, I think the one thing I personally would have liked to have done a little bit differently at the front was make very clear what the design intent was. And I think we ended up in a really good spot. But, you know, the type of design we were doing isn't your standard office workspace. At least I hope it's not. And so there was a lot of very precise, intricate things that, you know, some groups don't have to do every day. You know, there's different tolerances if you're building an office space versus studio space. And I think just making it very clear that some of those design intents early on, you know, probably would have solved a couple conversations we had along the way, you know, that we overcame all of it. But in the moment were pretty tough things to figure out.
Great. And Stacy, I'm curious from your perspective of all the other entities that you have to handle and what makes this bureau special. And also my original question of if there's anything you would do differently.
Mm-hmm. For me, and maybe Mark and Jay forgot about this part too, but that the space itself, if we could have just all agreed, and I don't mean the three of us, I mean many other people, about how much space we needed, because we did a lot of, you know, baiting, switching. I mean, it was just, you know, it's like, this is the amount of space we need. There was a lot of people that there were 400 people there in the bureau, but we thought maybe we only needed space for 200. I don't know. So we just kept hoping people would leave so we could grab leases. I think that made it a little difficult. So that would have been something. And if I really understood the approval process in DC better in the beginning, I don't know, maybe we would have had a person to do nothing but that, and like that really knew how to get through the system. So because some of that was painful. But overall, really, the team effort, I can't echo what these guys are saying. Really, I think that's why it came out as great as it did.
It sounds like you needed a fixer to help you get through DC. Imagine
that.
Like
a legal
fixer,
one,
you name it.
Have to pay a lot for
Well,
it.
and I will say you're not the only ones to go through the fact that DC, getting things done in DC is a very
tricky
labyrinth. Yeah, Herculean effort is libertine. It's weird. You got to go through a lot of hoops. And so, yeah, and so Stacy, what to you makes the NBC News Washington Bureau special at this point? What do you think separates it from the rest of the entities out there? No diss to 30 Rock.
It's I mean, it is our brand new studio. There is besides 30 Rock, it is, you know, the second largest bureau with a tremendous amount of programming. And that, you know, and everybody's on the air flawlessly at all times. And the team there is terrific. I mean, there's no question about it. I don't want to be so biased and say DC is better than any other place, but honestly, we can learn from them too. You know, if we ever actually had this opportunity, we did build a London bureau at the same time, pretty, you know, so, but, and LA is pretty new. So I think we might be done as far as building bureaus, for now, until maybe new technology comes out. But I think, it's an amazing facility, and Mark, it's beautiful. I mean, Mark did a beautiful, you know, design. I mean, when you watch that video, it is really impressive, you know, so it is something to be proud of for sure.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sorry, Wesley, we didn't get to you. I don't know if you're still on or you made it off the base, but I'm sorry we didn't get you. We'll have to maybe save you for another time. If there are no more questions,
quite all
right. Thank you. And so I just want to thank all of you, Mark, Jay, Stacy, Haley, who is behind the scenes. She's on, but she's behind the scenes. And just everybody that made this possible. I think there was also Richard. Richard made this possible too. And thank you for the SMPTE board for having this